Hi, I'm Bob,
And I'm Sherry.
and this is Mostly Politics with Bob and Sherry.
And today we're interviewing Mr. Sean Jones. Mr. Sean Jones is the Equal Employment Opportunity Manager for Veterans Affairs, and he is also a veteran himself. Before we start interviewing Mr. Jones, I just want to give a shout out to his wife. His wife have a business called Keepsakes with the Joneses, and she made these cups for us, coffee cups, and we use it for every show. So thank you, Kiana. All right, so let's get started, Sean.
Sean, what branch of the military did you serve in?
I served in the United States Army for 21 years between my active duty and reserve time.
So, did you retire? Did you get retirement?
Yeah, I retired on the reserve side, but I did have fair share of deployments. Got to travel the world, and I loved the experience as a whole.
What motivated you to join the military, Sean?
Um, a lot of people have those patriotic reasons for joining, but me, I was a young 16-year-old, naive, fairly intelligent, but underachieving kid from a low income family. So, about halfway through my senior year, my mom and I had a discussion about, hey, what are you doing after high school? And I was kind of undecided, but we both knew that my mom didn't really have enough money to put me through college. And the one constant in the equation was the recruiters just kept calling. So, a staff sergeant, Gary Lane, called. I picked up the phone. He got his hooks into me, my parents. I was too young to sign a contract. My mother had to sign for me, and the rest was history. I was ultimately looking for college money, and they were looking for undecided kids to fill the ranks. So it was a match made in poverty, so to speak.
I think that's a very common story. We don't hear it all the time, but yeah, I think it's very
Yeah,
common.
yeah,
Well, so you served in Desert Storm. What was that like?
I did. It was surreal to say the least. But I'll start with my military origins, if you don't mind. I mean, when it came time for basic training, I was scared as hell to say the least. Pardon my dog. She likes to be interviewed, I guess. Um, Physically, I was probably in top shape then, but I really wasn't prepared mentally or emotionally. So it made those first couple of weeks of basic training hell, for lack of a better term, because the Army's goal, or all the military services for that matter, is to take the individualism out the individual and have you focus on repetition and teamwork and cohesiveness and all those other things. So by week 4, I was pretty much dialed in, and it made the rest of the time easier. So fast forward to when I went to Germany, um, and we got the call that we were going overseas. Man, I thought I was indestructible. I mean, I had confidence in my leaders. I had confidence in my training because we trained like heck. I had confidence in the mission. So, and to be honest, I was probably too young and stupid to be scared. It was more of a fear of the unknown. But it didn't click home until we got there. We got on the ground and they start shelling with artillery the night before we were moving to a certain location. And then like, hey, we're in this for real. So you have to find ways to harden yourself. Or if you can't harden yourself, you find a way to cope with the situation because the situation's not going to change. The climate's not going to change. The environment's not going to change. The enemy's not going to change. So you have to just rely on everything around you and do the best you can to get through those situations.
So your survival mode kick in.
I did survive, but some scars showed, some don't. I made it out physically in one piece, but some things you got to make sure you check on from time to time to make sure you're okay.
So, how many tours did you serve besides the Desert Storm? What other wars were you in?
I did Desert Storm. I did a support mission in support of Bosnian operations. I went to Afghanistan, and my final deployment was in Kuwait in 2009 2010.
What was Afghanistan like?
Um, Imagine the Coors Light can, but with Taliban. I got off the plane and you look and it's like, wow, these mountains are amazing. You're taking in the sights, and then it like again, almost like my trip to the desert, it clicks like we're not here for the scenery. We're here to do a mission. And at that time, I was in charge of a platoon of soldiers, so they're relying on me to do the right thing and make the right decisions for them, and keep us out of trouble. And that's what you do. So you just put fear aside and have faith in the people that got you there, and have faith in the guys that are underneath you, and have faith that your leaders are doing the right thing for you. And it turned out well.
So what was it like coming home? How were you received?
Well, I was a little different because my first unit was in Germany, so I really didn't come home. But when we did return to Germany, I mean, the family support group, the spouses, and the local community gave us an amazing welcome home. I didn't get home till maybe a month later, and I spent that time more or less relaxing and taking my mind out of it because it had been 2 years, and I had never prior to that I had never been away from home. I call him Uncle Sugar. Uncle Sugar put me on my first flight. So coming home was just all right. Let's relax, decompress, and I didn't share that information with many people, so it was just time to relax more than anything when I got home that first time.
I served in the Navy during a time of peace,
Hmm.
but just I would be away from home for I took my leave all at once, so I'd be away from home for 11 months, home for a month,
Hmm.
and it was just weird. I mean, living 11 months on a ship with all these men, and then coming home to what I used to be, a family environment. It really felt weird, like I didn't fit, and I just wonder, being in an intense environment like you were in, where people are shooting and there's all. I mean, that had to be pretty weird too to go from this, kind of intensity to just calm.
Yeah, and I tell a lot of my military brothers and sisters that I mean you have to find that way to decompress, because I was in a combat unit my first deployment, and the Army teaches you, they train you to do all these things, to be ready to do all these things, to be cognitive of all these conditions, and you're be aware of your surroundings, and you're like this tightly compressed spring. But at the time, they didn't tell you how do you decompress, how do you let that spring go. And some people leave the military before they ever release that spring, or they don't know how to decompress properly. Um, and it can lead to stressors down the line. My wife and I joke. I have this alter ego called Sergeant Jones, and it's just a compilation of all the stress I endured throughout my time. And she would see it come out, and he could be vicious, and you have to find a way to temper that because your family didn't do anything to be the brunt of that burden. So you have to know, like I said, there's help out there, and if you need it, you got to get it. But sometimes our brothers and sisters we're taught to be self-reliant a lot of times, and you have to be able to pull that cord and say, hey, there's sources out here for me, or your brothers and sisters are out there for you. I am fortunate enough to work at the VA, so if I do need it, the resources are right there, and I extend that to everyone who may be in a position that needs it and hasn't yet reached out.
A lot of times when people talk about military service, they don't talk about the family back home.
Hmm.
So you have a wife, you've been married for a long time, and what is like, you can't speak for her, of course, but just a little bit, what it's like to for her to be here and not knowing what's happening with you over there. How was the communication? Is there any frustrating situation that happened?
Yeah, and I would say easily by far that spouses, whether it's a wife at home or a husband at home or a caregiver at home, they probably have a tougher job than anyone that's deployed to whatever area, be it combat or non-combat, because we have a schedule for most of the time. It's rigid. I get up, I do some physical training, I can go here, I got a mission to do on a day-to-day basis, and I have a general idea when I come home. At the end of the day, that's it, unless an emergency comes up. We had an instance where my wife, she calls me, I was in Afghanistan, and she calls me about the pools, like, hey, the pool's not working, and she turned into Sergeant Jones. And she's on this tirade, this, and this, and I'm like, the last thing I'm going to do is start an argument from thousands of miles away. Here, there's some money coming. If that doesn't work, here's this. My brother's on the call if you need him, and let's get through the storm together. Um, so you have to have a great line of communications and some great cooperation, and even a support system for that support system. So yeah, that's the communication. I mean, it evolved. My first deployment, it was basically driving 50 miles to an AT&T phone, but you fast forward, we had internet, so we would make designated times to chat to one another for about an hour every couple of days. My last deployment, I had a computer and Wi-Fi in my room, so I could. She was there. I was able to talk to the kids when I needed to. So things evolved, and I do pride the armed forces with pivoting to make sure we were able to have consistent communication with the family.
And what was it like from that transitioning from military when you finally retired and you finally can put that life behind to the civilian life? What is that like?
Yeah, so transition's a little bit different for everyone. Like I said, when I came home, I mean, it's your natural instinct to try to get back to the head of the table and be the man of the house again. But you have to understand, in some instances, almost as Bob stated, you're gone for a year, and families moving on, families growing, families in their own routines. So I just took some time. It's like, look, I can't just jump back here. That's going to be disruptive to what's going on right now. So let me slowly reintegrate, slowly reacclimate to the family life. And as the days and weeks go on, I'll assume that role again. But I need to take a back seat, transition to the passenger seat, transition to the driver's seat, because doing it too quick can make it really chaotic for the family. But I don't know. But at the end, when it finally came time for me to hang up the uniform, there was some separation anxiety because you want to think, you look back on your career, it's like, hey, did I do everything I set out to accomplish? Was there any unfinished business? Or my peers going to think of me any different that I left the Army at a fairly early age? But again, when you take the family into perspective, like, wow, what would a fifth deployment do to my kids, my mom, my family, my wife? Um, and it just, the pros outweighed the cons. So I knew it was time to hang it up. I had a great job lined up for me to transition into. So that definitely helped with the transition.
You're an equal employment opportunity manager with the Veterans Admin. Is that the VA hospital
Yeah,
or?
VA hospital.
Okay. Okay. Can you talk about what that is?
So basically, it's just making sure that the playing field is level for everyone, whether it's a person applying for employment, a current employee, or someone that's recently separated from the organization. And if any employees have a perception of bias or discrimination in the workplace, you make sure that their voice is heard or there's a venue to kind of adjudicate those claims that they raise. But more importantly, it's just making sure that everyone has that voice because some of the best work environments I've ever been involved in are ones where you have a cohesive, diverse, and equitable environment where all the employees feel welcomed and valued by whatever organization they're assigned to.
So, what do you say to some of the critics that they feel like an equal employment opportunity when some people hear those words? All they're thinking is they may think about affirmative action or maybe just giving more opportunities to the minority employees. So, as a manager, can you tell us a little bit more? What's the difference between what you do and that and the affirmative action? And what do you do on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah. Well, there's some similarities and there's some differences. EEO just ensures everyone receives the same treatment. Affirmative action focuses on a group or groups that have been historically treated unfairly and kind of targets them. But one of my main things, I do look at diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace because, again, we want to make sure everyone is receiving that same treatment. So I'm looking at diversity by occupation, by gender, by disability, by veteran status, and are we diverse in our leadership? And if there's opportunities for improvement, we look at that and we try to implement best practices here and then share that with my sister organizations if they're having trouble or they're having similar concerns. Um, we also do targeted recruitment because we want to make sure at the VA that our workforce is commensurate to the workforce around here. So we can say for VA Pittsburgh or Pitt to Pittsburgh and surrounding counties, we're probably at 12 to 15% African Americans in the workplace. So we want to make sure that the VA workplace mirrors that. And if we're not at those numbers, then we want to see if we can do recruitment efforts, say getting out to local schools or community organizations, veterans organizations, and see what we're doing. Where people are leaving for certain reasons, we want to do those exit interviews to say, hey, what's making you leave the VA, and how can you should stay, and how can we make this? If it's for a diversity, equity, inclusion reason, we certainly want to tighten that up to make sure we're doing the best for all our employees.
So would you ever, if you had a position, um, do you ever exclude certain people because you're trying to increase, say, the black, or do you just make more of an effort to recruit and get more candidates?
No, we want to make sure the hiring process or the selection process, even more importantly, is fair and equitable. I mean, we may be short minority candidates, but that doesn't mean, I mean, we can do targeted recruitment. That doesn't mean we do targeted selection because then again, that's unfair to the other demographics in the workplace because discrimination doesn't simply go towards a minority candidate. Say a majority candidate can say, hey, I wasn't selected because I was a white male. And that's not right either. So we want to make sure that, again, the hiring process or any access to any incentives in the VA are on a level playing field for all candidates.
Do-
Okay.
does the culture now that is changing, where the minority status also include the LGBTQ community, especially for people that's transgender? Now, in your training and the new emphasis, do you get those type of emphasis and say we have to also give opportunity to the LGBTQ community and the transgender community?
Diversity includes everyone, regardless of race, color, sex, sexual identity, sexual preference, parental status. All that's inclusive. But with that, people have to self-identify, so to speak. So if you identify as that and you have concerns in the workplace regarding hiring recruitment, we ask that your voice be heard. Because we can't take action. An old sergeant told me back in the day, the squeaky wheel gets the oil. If there's issues happening in the workplace, we need to know about it. If there's things that aren't being addressed, um, we need to know about it. I mean, I am fortunate to have some great compassionate, understanding leadership. So when there's things in the diversity, equity, inclusion, equal opportunity realm that need to be addressed, um, my boss is great. My boss's boss is great. And if there needs to be new initiatives out there, I feel confident that I can bring that forward, be heard, and we can take the appropriate actions as needed.
What has been your experience with race or racism, in the military before and after, that kind of thing?
Well, as an American, I learned that there's a lot of bias in our country. And I call it unconscious bias, and that's one of the things I speak of when I'm at work. We call it it's unconscious bias because it could be. We all have our perception of things based on where we grew up, how we grew up, political affiliations. For us, military affiliations, and it religious beliefs or things of that nature. And that lens can affect how we treat people, how we perceive certain things, how we act when it comes to certain things that we experience or we hear about or read about in the world. So we just need to take our time to get beyond those surface perceptions. Um, I had a military buddy I went to war with. He was from Minnesota. Hadn't talked to him since the war in '92. We're on a social media platform talking about the pipeline going through a Native American reservation, and we had some starkly contrasting ideas or views on how this was supposed to go down. And it got to the point where it's like, hey man, I just sent him a message. Pick up the phone. Here's my number. Call me. So 5 o'clock in the morning, we're on the phone. We're talking. It's 2009. We haven't talked. No, probably no. We're like 2015. We haven't talked since '92. So we picked up the phone. We start talking, and it's, hey man, we have the same interests. We want the same school, safe school for our kids, safe environment, nice, affordable, comfortable wage to work in, great working conditions. We want the same things. It doesn't matter that you have one view or one political view or social identity, and I have something that may be different. We want the same things. Let's work towards that common goal. Because if not, we deal with like a lot of things on the surface, and if you don't ground yourself in truth, then we have a distorted lens on how we see things, and I think that's what I was trying to get to before. Um, we rely on certain narratives to dictate things, and we need to get past that and get to the root that we have more in common than we do apart. Differences, I should say.
That's very good. I have I know a lot of people from the older people from Vietnam War, and those folks are very bitter the way they were treated when they came home. And I know, like with Desert Storm, the the soldiers come back from Desert Storm had a heroic welcome, and then the people from the Vietnam War had a terrible welcome here in the United States. Do you see that in the Veterans Hospital? Do you see the difference between the people come out of the Desert Storm and the people come out of the Vietnam War?
Um, Not, I can't say, because regardless of the war you served in, we're all brothers, we're all sisters, even if I'm a employee who never served before. Regardless of era, my job is to welcome you, treat you well, make sure you're getting where you need to go, make sure you have the assistance, make sure you have the resources. And the VA has pivoted immensely. I mean, just like the buildings have evolved. Um, my first time home was in '92. They had the gravel parking lot, valet, and it was gridlock. You were going in. I graduated from nursing school in '95, so I go in and like, hey, looking for a job, and it was a recession. Well, not a recession, but there was a surplus in nursing. They were like, good luck, and I'm thinking, wow, as a vet, I can't get here. But you fast forward to now, resources are there. If the veterans need help, regardless of era, the VA is a great place to get it. It's an amazing place to get it. At some point, I may be a patient there, and I have no qualms going in to receive care.
As a black man, you're a black American, given the history of this country and starting from slavery to civil rights movement and now the Black Lives Matter movement, and then now one of the big topic is critical race theory. So what are your thoughts on all of it? I know it's a big topic, and so you can take your time with that.
I mean, race is a very, very touchy subject in America. And when you speak on race, it's almost like when you speak on religion or politics. It'll lead to a dispute, an argument, a conflict, and rarely is anything productive gained from those situations. So when we talk about critical race theory, I mean, you talk about race and race theory, but we're seeking the truth. So let's call it something different. Let's call it curriculum respecting truth, because we've learned historically the most effective way to destroy people is to deny and obliterate their sense of self and their link to their history. So when you're removing them from their history, you're their linkage is gone. If I said, Sherry, you need to cut all context from your origins, from your place of birth, there's no way in heck you would agree to that. So for me as a African American man, my history would stop at some point. My last name isn't indicative of my history. So we want to learn about our origins. And when we learn about that and put that in an environment when everyone can learn that history, okay, and know that America had some rights, America's did some things wrong, but you can't learn from those wrongs unless you dive in. So we want to learn the truth. And we should all be truth seekers, because it relies on, again, not relying on narratives or clips or political advertising that we see in 30-second clips around this time of year. Not people voting red until I'm dead or blue no matter who. Let's let's get to being knowledgeable about not only ourselves but this political culture that we're involved in, and instead of making these microwave decisions, let's start marinating ourselves in truth, so to speak, because we can collectively change our landscape if we learn that we have more in common than we do differences.
You mentioned being grounded in truth several times. I mean, do you have like a philosophical moral belief system that's kind of your source of truth?
No, it just develops over time. Like, I mean, even going back to my military origins, the first time we were going to the Gulf War, we heard a lot of things about the enemy, the Iraqis, the culture, the climate, and I knew nothing about um, different religions, just to say the least. So all I knew was what my leadership was telling me. I got home and I had a discussion with one of my friends in high school that I didn't know was Muslim. And he said, Sean, I said, and I was proud of my accomplishments. He said, man, I went over there, I did this thing, man. We put foot to tail Saddam. We got in, we got out, and I was very happy. He's like, do you know you were fighting your historical brothers over time? And it took me a second, and I sat back and No one ever gave me that perspective. So it taught me, it kind of sparked an inner philosopher in me to start questioning everything. So no matter what it is, I see something on TV. I can't take that at surface value. I need to read more on that subject. I need to be intelligent. Sherry has a lot of rallies or at her establishment, and I'll go in, and most times I'm the only black man there. Probably the only registered Democrat. And it's very interesting because I come into the place, it's packed. You see the candidates there, you see all the posters. Some people won't even talk to me. Some people look at like this thing, like, why are you here? I'll sit down, I'll grab my drink, and one or two guys will come up and approach, and we can actually engage in some intelligent conversation. Well, this person's this, well, this person's this, or you're a communist, you're Antifa, you're all types of things. And I'm like, no, let's get beyond what you see in the 30-second ad. Let's get down to brass tacks. And most people we engage with, we end up having a productive dialogue. One of the questions I asked the candidate, we were asking about not defunding the police, but giving the police the appropriate resources they need. And a lady that was sitting next to me yelled out, well, what if they have guns? I'm like, well, what if they have Skittles? So I'm not saying defund, but let's not only in politics, not only in policing, but in life, let's temper the response to what's really going on and not be caught up by catchphrases, catchwords, and things of that nature. Because again, I can't say it enough. We have more in common than we do different. So let's home in on what we have in common. The commonalities are paramount.
Yeah. Anything else you want to add? We're come to a closing. There's anything else you want to add to? That was really good what you just said.
We can do some great work when we combine our forces. I do this video, and I would challenge anyone viewing this video to look at it. Heineken does a diversity video where you have people from different backgrounds, and they're talking, while they're talking, they're actually building a bar, and they come together. And once the bar is built, they come out and they are totally opposed to each other, and they didn't know it. And their videos are broadcasted about each other to each other. And it's the bottom line was we have barriers, we have differences. We're not always going to agree, and that's okay. But I was listening to a pastor a couple Sundays ago, and he was like, "Don't be so black that you don't have white friends, or don't be so Republican that you don't have Democratic friends." I was trying to book a venue, and if I just dealt in one lane, and that lane fails, I need to have something else to fall back on, and that might cause me to make an uncomfortable partnership. But if you become comfortable in one lane, sometimes you become complacent, and if you become complacent, you're not willing to step outside of that comfort zone and do what's needed or do what's right. I always challenge my kids: we're doing okay, but your task is to be better than me. I mean, taking this torch and just standing here with it is good, but can you do better? Can you do more? Can you be president? Can you do something? That's the challenge. And then they take it. My daughter's just trailblazing. It's amazing. It's amazing to watch. And she's coming to her own. I just wish that all of us could come together, despite our differences, to leave this country better than what we got it.
I wish more people would think your way. Then that would be great. Well, this was a fantastic interview. Thank you so much, Sean.
Thank you. My wife thanks you as well.